Think about the most devastating moment of your life, that crushing failure, that heartbreaking loss, that overwhelming betrayal, the moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself and your world shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Now ask yourself a simple but profound question. What if that very moment, the one you've been trying to forget, the one that still makes your stomach clench when it surfaces in your memory, what if that moment contains the blueprint for your greatest strength? What would change if you discovered that the experience you've labeled as your deepest wound actually contains the exact genetic code for your most extraordinary power? Science is now revealing a startling truth. There is a hidden architecture to human suffering, one that explains why two people can face identical traumas, yet emerge with dramatically different outcomes. One person remains permanently diminished, trapped in the gravity well of their pain for decades. The other transforms that same devastating experience into a source of resilience so profound it appears almost superhuman to outside observers. The difference isn't luck, it isn't innate temperament, and it certainly isn't some mystical concept of fate or destiny. The difference lies in specific neurological and psychological processes that remain invisible to most people, but that permanently alter how the brain responds to adversity. These processes determine whether trauma becomes a prison or a portal, whether suffering becomes a sentence or a source of strength, unlike anything you've ever experienced. But here's what's truly extraordinary. These processes can be deliberately activated. The transformation of pain into power isn't random. It follows precise patterns that can be learned, applied, and mastered by anyone willing to understand them. What I'm about to share with you has been hidden in plain sight for centuries, glimpsed by ancient philosophers, validated by modern neuroscience, and demonstrated by individuals who have overcome unimaginable hardships to achieve extraordinary heights of human potential. By the end of our journey today, you'll understand why the moments that have hurt you most contain the exact blueprint for your greatest strength. You'll discover why resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you build through specific mental frameworks that permanently alter your neurological response to adversity. But first, we need to examine a counterintuitive truth that challenges everything our culture has taught us about how humans respond to suffering. In the aftermath of World War II, a survivor of 4 Nazi concentration camps emerged from unspeakable horror with a radical insight into human suffering. His name was Viktor Frankl, and his observations would revolutionize our understanding of how humans respond to extreme adversity. Frankl noticed something that defied conventional psychological wisdom. Among his fellow prisoners who endured identical external conditions, the same starvation, the same brutal treatment, the same daily proximity to death, some maintained their inner dignity and even found meaning amid the suffering, while others collapsed into moral and psychological dissolution. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, Frankl wrote in his landmark work, Man's Search for Meaning, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. This observation, that our response to suffering is not determined by the suffering itself, but by our relationship to it, became the foundation of Frankl's logotherapy, a psychological approach centered on finding meaning even in life's most painful experiences. But while Frankl's insights were revolutionary, they remained incomplete. They explained that our relationship to suffering determines its impact, but they didn't fully illuminate how certain individuals transform suffering into extraordinary strength, while others remain permanently diminished by it. To understand this critical difference, the difference that will determine whether your own past traumas become sources of limitation or catalysts for exceptional growth, we need to look deeper into the neurological and psychological mechanisms that separate post-traumatic stress from what psychologists now call post-traumatic growth. This concept of post-traumatic growth represents one of the most significant paradigm shifts in modern psychology. It reveals that trauma doesn't just wound us, it can fundamentally transform us in ways that expand our capabilities beyond what was possible before the traumatic event occurred. Consider the research of Dr. Richard Tedeschi and Dr. Lawrence Calhoun, who first coined the term post-traumatic growth in the 1990s. Their studies revealed that between 50 to 80% of people who experience trauma report positive changes as a result, not despite their suffering, but because of it. These changes include enhanced personal strength, deeper relationships with others, recognition of new possibilities in life, greater appreciation for life, significant spiritual growth. But here's the critical question that remained unanswered in their early research. Why do some people experience these transformative benefits while others remain trapped in their trauma? What invisible factors determine whether suffering becomes a prison or a portal to exceptional human development? The answers lie at the intersection of three domains that are rarely connected in our understanding of human resilience: neuroplasticity, how adversity physically rewires the brain; cognitive framing, how we mentally process traumatic events; and what psychologists call meaning-making, how we integrate painful experiences into our life narrative. When these three elements align in specific ways, something remarkable happens. The very experiences that might destroy one person become the catalyst for another person's extraordinary evolution. But before we can understand how to deliberately activate this transformative process in our own lives, we need to confront an uncomfortable truth about contemporary culture, a widespread misconception that has left millions of people unnecessarily vulnerable to life's inevitable hardships. What if the popular psychological advice to protect yourself from negativity and avoid toxic situations isn't just incomplete, but actually dangerous in its implications? What if this well-intentioned guidance has inadvertently created a generation that lacks the fundamental neural pathways required for genuine resilience? Let's begin with a startling neurological truth. Your brain physically changes in response to adversity. This isn't metaphorical, it's literal. Every significant challenge you face triggers a cascade of neurochemical responses that can either strengthen or weaken specific neural pathways, depending on how you process the experience. When faced with adversity, your brain has three potential neurological responses. First, it can form what neuroscientists call fear conditioning, strengthening neural pathways associated with threat detection and avoidance. This is what happens in post-traumatic stress disorder, where the brain becomes hypervigilant to potential dangers, creating a state of perpetual threat response that diminishes quality of life. Second, your brain can simply endure the experience without significant neural adaptation, neither growing stronger nor becoming measurably weaker. This is what psychologists call resilience in its most basic form, the ability to withstand hardship without being fundamentally changed by it. But there's a third possibility, the one that explains the extraordinary transformations observed in certain individuals after trauma. Your brain can undergo what neuroscientists call stress inoculation, a process where controlled exposure to adversity triggers the growth of new neural connections that actually enhance your capacity to function under pressure. This third response, stress inoculation, is the neurological foundation of post-traumatic growth. It explains why some people emerge from devastating experiences with capabilities that exceed their pre-trauma functioning. Consider the remarkable case of Jim Stockdale, the highest-ranking naval officer held as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. Tortured repeatedly over 7 years of captivity, Stockdale emerged not just intact, but with extraordinary psychological strength that informed his later success as a military leader, academic, and public servant. When asked how he survived, when many others didn't, Stockdale gave a counterintuitive answer that has become known as the Stockdale paradox. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. This paradoxical mindset, simultaneously accepting the reality of your suffering while maintaining unwavering belief in your capacity to prevail, creates a specific neurological condition that activates post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. But here's what's crucial to understand. This mindset isn't something you can simply adopt in the moment of crisis. It requires deliberate preparation, the development of specific neural pathways before adversity strikes. This brings us to the first critical component of the resilience blueprint, the practice of intentional discomfort. Researchers at the University of Texas discovered that individuals who regularly engage in voluntary discomfort, activities that push them beyond their comfort zones in controlled ways, develop thicker neural pathways in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for emotional regulation during stress. These strengthened neural pathways act as psychological infrastructure that determines how you'll respond when involuntary suffering inevitably arrives. Without this infrastructure, your brain defaults to protection mechanisms that may help you survive the moment, but limit your capacity for long-term growth. Think of it like physical training. An athlete doesn't become stronger despite resistance. They become stronger because of resistance. The deliberate application of stress to muscle tissue triggers adaptation that increases capacity. Your psychological resilience functions according to the same principle. But this raises an important question. If voluntary discomfort builds resilience, why do so many people who endure incredible hardship remain traumatized rather than transformed? The answer lies in the second component of the resilience blueprint, cognitive framing. Cognitive framing refers to the mental structure through which you interpret adversity. Dr. Carol Dweck's groundbreaking research on mindset provides critical insight here. Her studies reveal that individuals with a fixed mindset tend to interpret challenges as threats to their identity, while those with a growth mindset interpret identical challenges as opportunities for development. This seemingly subtle difference in cognitive framing creates dramatically different neurochemical responses to the same external reality. When you frame adversity as a threat, your brain releases stress hormones that impair cognitive function and strengthen neural pathways associated with avoidance. When you frame identical adversity as a challenge, your brain releases a different profile of neurotransmitters that enhance cognitive function and strengthen neural pathways associated with approach and engagement. But cognitive framing alone doesn't complete the resilience blueprint. The third and perhaps most crucial component is what psychologists call meaning-making, the process of integrating painful experiences into a coherent life narrative that explains not just what happened to you, but why it happened and how it serves some larger purpose. Viktor Frankl's profound insight was that humans can endure almost any how if they have a sufficient why. The research of Dr. Michael Steger at Colorado State University has validated this perspective, showing that the presence of meaning in life is one of the strongest predictors of psychological well-being, stronger even than positive emotion or the absence of distress. When these three components, neuroplasticity through intentional discomfort, cognitive framing through growth mindset, and psychological integration through meaning-making, align in specific ways, the conditions for post-traumatic growth are established. But here's what a few people realize. You don't have to wait for trauma to occur before activating this transformative process. You can deliberately construct these conditions in advance, creating what psychologists call psychological preparedness for life's inevitable challenges. This brings us to the practical application of the resilience blueprint, the specific practices that transform these theoretical insights into lived experience. Right now, as you're listening to this, I want you to consider a difficult truth. You are currently unprepared for the adversity that will inevitably enter your life. This isn't a criticism. It's simply the reality for most people in contemporary society. Our culture has systematically eliminated the conditions that naturally build psychological resilience. We've created unprecedented comfort, removed natural consequences, and constructed social media environments that allow endless avoidance of discomfort through constant distraction. The result is a generation with historically low tolerance for psychological distress, a phenomenon psychologists call declining distress tolerance. Studies show that the average person today will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid even minor discomfort, often at the expense of long-term well-being. This matters profoundly because life will test you, not might test you, will test you. Relationship failures, career setbacks, health crises, financial hardships, loss of loved ones. These experiences aren't exceptional. They're inevitable aspects of the human journey. And when these moments arrive, your response won't be determined by what you know intellectually. It will be determined by the neural pathways you've built through consistent practice. Ask yourself honestly, what practices have you established to systematically build your capacity for resilience? How regularly do you voluntarily step beyond your comfort zone in controlled ways? How intentionally do you practice framing adversity as an opportunity for growth rather than a threat to your identity? If you're like most people, the answer is uncomfortable. You haven't established these practices. You've been hoping that when adversity arrives, you'll somehow spontaneously develop the capacity to respond effectively, despite having never trained this capacity in advance. This would be like expecting to run a marathon without ever having trained for one. The moment would reveal the reality of your preparation, regardless of your intentions or desires. But here's where this message transitions from confrontation to opportunity. You can begin building these capacities today through specific practices that have been validated both by ancient wisdom traditions and contemporary neuroscience. The first practice is what psychologists call controlled exposure, the deliberate engagement with manageable discomfort for the purpose of building capacity. This might involve cold exposure through practices like cold showers or ice baths, which research shows increases emotional regulation capacity. Fasting for defined periods, which strengthens impulse control neural pathways. Public speaking or social risk-taking, which desensitizes the amygdala to social threat. Physical challenges that push your perceived limits, recalibrating your sense of what's possible. What's crucial here isn't the specific form of discomfort, but rather your relationship to it. Are you engaging with discomfort as a deliberate practice for building capacity, or are you simply enduring it because you have no choice? The second practice is cognitive reframing, the deliberate reinterpretation of adverse events as opportunities rather than threats. This isn't positive thinking in the superficial sense of denying reality. It's the disciplined practice of asking different questions when faced with challenge. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is this making possible?" Instead of, "How can I avoid this discomfort?" ask, "What capacity is this building in me?" Instead of, "When will this be over?" ask, "What can I learn while this is happening?" These questions literally redirect neural activity from the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, to the prefrontal cortex, the center for higher order thinking, creating different neurochemical responses to identical external circumstances. The third practice is narrative integration, creating coherent stories that explain how your difficulties serve a larger purpose. Research by Dr. James Pennebaker at the University of Texas has shown that the simple act of writing about traumatic experiences in ways that create meaningful narratives produces measurable improvements in both psychological and physical health. But here's what you need to understand about these practices. They work only to the extent that you actually implement them. Knowing about them intellectually, without embodying them, practically creates what psychologists call the knowing-doing gap, perhaps the single greatest obstacle to personal transformation. This gap exists because transformation requires more than information. It requires integration, and integration happens not through passive consumption, but through active implementation. So I want to challenge you directly. Will you begin implementing these practices today, or will you return to the comfortable patterns that leave you vulnerable to life's inevitable challenges? This isn't a rhetorical question. It's a decisive moment that will determine whether this message becomes a catalyst for genuine change in your life, or simply another piece of content consumed and forgotten. The difference between these outcomes lies not in what you know, but in what you do with what you know. Let me share a truth that's both sobering and empowering. Resilience isn't something you discover in the moment of crisis. It's something you build methodically in advance of crisis. The individuals who transform adversity into strength aren't practicing resilience for the first time when disaster strikes. They've been systematically constructing the neural architecture of resilience through consistent practice, often for years before their defining moments of challenge. This explains why two people can face identical adversity, yet emerge with dramatically different outcomes. It's not that one person possesses some mystical quality the other lacks. It's that one person has built the specific neural pathways that transform suffering into strength, while the other hasn't. The good news is that these pathways can be developed at any point in your life through the deliberate practice of the resilience blueprint we've explored. Intentional discomfort, regular, voluntary exposure to manageable challenges that expand your capacity. Cognitive reframing, disciplined practice in interpreting adversity as opportunity rather than threat. Meaning, integration, creating coherent narratives that explain how your difficulties serve a larger purpose. When these three practices converge, something remarkable happens. You develop what psychologists call antifragility, a quality beyond mere resilience. While resilient systems withstand stress without breaking, anti-fragile systems actually become stronger because of stress. This is the ultimate goal of the resilience blueprint, not simply to help you endure hardship, but to transform hardship into the very catalyst for your greatest evolution. Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, creating pieces more valuable and beautiful than the original unbroken items. This art form embodies a profound philosophical truth. Our broken places, when properly healed, become our strongest and most beautiful features. Your past wounds, your current challenges, your future adversities, all contain within them the potential to become the golden seams that make you not just whole again, but more extraordinary than you were before breaking. But this transformation isn't automatic. It requires conscious choice and consistent practice. It demands that you stop avoiding discomfort and start strategically engaging with it. It requires that you develop the cognitive discipline to reframe adversity not as an interruption of your life's purpose, but as an integral part of it. Most importantly, it requires that you recognize that the capacity for resilience isn't something you're born with or without. It's something you build, choice by choice, day by day, practice by practice. The question isn't whether life will break you. It will. We all break in different ways at different times. The question is what you'll become in the repair. Will your broken places remain permanent wounds, or will they become the strongest, most beautiful aspects of who you are? The difference lies not in what happens to you, but in how you respond to what happens. And that response isn't determined in the moment of crisis. It's determined by the practices you establish long before crisis arrives. If this message has resonated with you, if you recognize that building resilience requires more than knowledge but actual practice, I invite you to make a public commitment to this journey. Leave a comment below with the phrase "strength through storms" to signify your decision to begin building the neural architecture of resilience today. This simple act of public commitment activates what psychologists call implementation intention, significantly increasing the likelihood that you'll actually implement these practices rather than merely consuming this information. When you comment with "strength through storms," you're not just engaging with content, you're declaring your intention to transform how you respond to life's inevitable challenges. You're choosing to build the specific capacities that will determine whether suffering becomes a prison or a portal in your life. The journey we've explored today, from understanding the neuroscience of resilience to implementing the specific practices that build it, represents just the beginning of what's possible when you approach personal development as a systematic practice rather than a sporadic event. What separates those who continuously evolve from those who repeatedly stagnate isn't talent, opportunity, or luck. It's the presence of deliberate systems that translate knowledge into practice and practice into permanent capacity. The resilience blueprint we've examined is one such system, a methodology for transforming adversity into advantage that has been validated by both ancient wisdom traditions and cutting-edge neuroscience. But it's merely one aspect of the larger architecture of personal sovereignty, the capacity to shape your life according to your highest values rather than your momentary impulses or external pressures. In the coming weeks, I'll be exploring other critical components of this architecture. The attention recovery protocol, how to reclaim your most precious resource from the forces designed to capture and monetize it. The decision matrix, a system for making choices that align with your future aspirations rather than your present comfort. The identity evolution framework, how to deliberately shed limiting self-concepts and construct empowering ones. Each of these systems addresses a specific aspect of personal sovereignty, the capacity to direct your life with intention rather than simply reacting to circumstances beyond your control. If you're committed to developing this capacity, if you're ready to stop being a passenger in your own life and start becoming its architect, then subscribe right now. Not tomorrow, not when you have more time, not when you've thought about it more. Right now. This isn't about adding another channel to your subscription list. It's about making a decisive commitment to your own evolution, to becoming someone who doesn't just consume information, but systematically implements it. Click subscribe, enable notifications, and join a community of individuals who are approaching personal development not as entertainment or inspiration, but as a rigorous practice, a deliberate system for becoming more tomorrow than you're today. The challenges in your life aren't going away. The question is whether you'll face them with the same capacities you have now, or with expanded capabilities that transform those challenges from threats into catalysts for your greatest growth. The choice is yours. I'll see you in the next video.